Welcome everybody to chapter 4. This is managerial accounting as we are talking this week about process costing. Now, process costing is some people skip this chapter, but I find it really fascinating because process costing does happen in many industries. Um, we have spent the prior 2 chapters talking about job order costing. Now, in both job order and in process costing, both types of systems, of course, assign the materials, the labor, and the overhead cost to products, and they provide a mechanism for helping to compute unit. Here, let me just enter this person and started um, for how they go about computing unit product costs. Both of these systems take manufacturing accounts, such as manufacturing overhead, raw materials, work in process, and finished goods, just like we've done in the previous chapter. So the flow of cost is going to be similar in both types of processing cost systems. Now, with job order costing, there's different jobs that are all worked during the same period, and each job might have unique aspects to it. With job order costing, costs are accumulated per job, and the costs are put on that job cost sheet. Whereas what we're going to talk about today with process costing, a single product is produced on a continuous basis or for long periods of time, where you pretty much have identical products like milk, like gasoline. These costs get accumulated by department, and then the unit costs are computed by department. So process costing is used for products that are A, different and produced continuously, B, similar and produced continuously, C, individual units produced to customer specifications, or D, purchased from vendors. It's going to be the ones that are similar and produced continuously. Now, any unit in an organization where materials, labor, or overhead are added to the product would be the processing departments. These activities performed in a processing department are performed uniformly on all of the units of production. The output of a processing department's homogeneous. Products in the process costing environment typically flow in a sequence from one department straight into another department. So at this time, I am going to get into McGraw-Hill and show you a video. I'm hoping it's going to be loud enough. I think that's what's happened before. It's not loud enough for you guys. Hopefully I can get it loud enough. Let's see here. I need to go to video files. Okay. I'm just gonna, some of these are sometimes helpful if I can make this a little bigger. Tell me if after this one you have a hard time hearing it, I won't play anymore. Did you guys hear that? Someone was. Yes, the sound is really low and choppy. Jessica could not hear it either. Okay. Well, at least we know that that's not going to work. Sometimes looking at some of those videos is just really helpful for you to understand an example of how process costing works. So, our first step is to understand the way in which we record, prepare the journal entries of the flow of materials and labor and overhead through the system. So we're going to ultimately gather the direct materials, the direct labor, and the manufacturing overhead while these products are being manufactured. They will get put into work in process. Again, once the job is completed, they will go into finished goods with ultimately the goal of being put onto the income statement under cost of goods sold. Now, with a job order costing system, we take the direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, and we apply them to various jobs, ultimately then into finished goods and cost of goods sold. But with process costing, we're going to trace these costs into processing departments, as you saw on that slide. And then instead of into specific jobs, they're going to go into processing departments, ultimately into finished goods and cost of goods sold. So for purposes in just this example, assume there are two processing departments, departments A and B. So raw materials get transferred into Department A and Department B in their work in process. As in job order costing, materials are drawn from the storeroom using a material requisition form. Materials can be added into any processing department. Here's the journal entry to issue raw materials to processing department A and to processing department B. The same thing happens with labor. Labor costs can be directly assigned into various processing departments. In this example, certain individuals will work in Department A, certain individuals will work in Department B. So those costs get assigned to the processing departments. In process costing, labor costs get traced again to departments. Unlike job order costing, they get traced to specific jobs. So here's the journal entry to show work in process, Department A, work in process to Department B, and then we credit the salaries and wages payable. Here you see now the manufacturing overhead that's being applied to the various departments. So guys, it's just like job order, except instead of jobs, we've got departments. Here is the journal entry to show the manufacturing overhead going into Department A and Department B. Now, the transferred in cost from Department A are going to be added to the manufacturing cost incurred in Department B. If you think about it, the process generally involves initial steps, and then after those initial steps are completed, the entire product is going to be transferred into the next department. So the journal entry to record transferring the units into the next department for further processing will be a debit to work in process into Department B, and we'll credit the work in process from Department A once that has been completed to transfer it into B. Then once, in this case, we've only got two departments, once the work in process from Department B is completed, we'll take all of that cost of goods manufactured and transfer it into finished goods. Okay. The journal entry to show the completion of the process in Department B and moving it to finished goods is going to be a debit to our finished goods and a credit to work in process from Department B. Then those finished goods sitting, those that are sold, we'll credit them out of finished goods and debit them into the expense account cost of goods sold. So basically, this is the ultimate goal, is to sell these products that we are in fact manufacturing. So key items here. In this process costing, each department has to calculate two numbers for financial reporting purposes: the cost of its ending work in process inventory and the cost of its completed units that were transferred to the next stage of that production process. So there are two methods of performing the computations. One method is called the weighted average method of process costing, by taking unit costs, combining costs and outputs from the current and prior periods, or the FIFO method, which we aren't really going to get into in the appendix. We're not going to discuss that method very much here. So the characteristics of the weighted average method: it makes no distinction between work done in the prior and current periods. It blends together the units and costs from prior and current periods, and the equivalent units of production for a department are the number of units transferred to the next department plus the equivalent units in the department's ending work in process inventory. Then our conversion costs, our direct labor costs, are going to be relatively small in comparison to other product costs in this process cost system. So direct labor costs are going to be combined with manufacturing overhead. And we usually will put them into something we call conversion costs. Because really in this scenario, the biggest cost you're going to be dealing with in process costing are the direct materials. Okay. Equivalent units are defined as the product of the number of partially completed units and the percentage completion of those units. This has to be calculated because usually departments have some partially completed units in its beginning and its ending inventories. So it's something we'll, as we go through some of these problems, we'll look at it. In calculating what we call these equivalent units, we're going to take the partially completed units times the percentage completion of those units with respect to which processing department they're in. And then these equivalent units is going to be the number of complete units that could have been obtained from the materials and effort that went into these partially completed units. So for the current period, Jones started 15,000 units and completed 10,000 units, leaving 5,000 units in process, 30% complete. How many equivalent units of production did Jones have for the period? They're going to have 10,000 units plus 5,000 units at 30% complete means there's 11,500 equivalent units that they had for the period. Let's take a look at exercise 4.7 to go through some journal entries. Okay. Chocolatier de Genève is located in a French-speaking canton in Switzerland. The company makes chocolate truffles that are sold in popular embossed tins. The company has two processing departments, cooking and molding. In the cooking department, the raw ingredients for the truffles are mixed and then cooked in special candy making vats. In the molding department, the melted chocolate and other ingredients from the cooking department are carefully poured into molds and decorative flourishes are applied by hand. After cooling, the truffles are packed for sale. The company uses a process costing system. The T accounts on the next slide show the flow of costs through the two departments in April. So you see, we started on April 1st with a balance in cooking of 8,000. We added our direct materials, our direct labor, and our overhead. So direct materials, 42,000, direct labor of 50, and overhead of 75,000. We then transferred out 160,000 were transferred out. In the molding department, you see we started with 4,000. We transferred in from the cooking department 160,000. We added our direct labor and overhead, 36,000, 45,000, and ultimately we transferred out 240,000. Our job is to prepare journal entries showing the flow of costs through the two processing departments during April. So as you see here, we start with, let me just go back here and show, let's see the direct materials in the work in process cooking. You see 42,000 there. You see direct labor 50,000 and overhead of 75,000. So as you see here, our work in process, we debited work in process for cooking of 42,000, and we credited the raw materials inventory for 42,000. For salaries and wages payable, we put into labor debit work in process for cooking for 50, debit work in process molding for 36. We credited salaries and wages payable of 86. Now let me go back and show you the direct labor here of 50, the direct labor here of 36, how we're coming up with our numbers. And that was credited wages and salaries payable of 86. Next, our manufacturing overhead. If we look back here, we see 75 came in to this department, 45,000 came in to this department. So we are showing work in process, cooking 75,000, work in process molding of 45,000, and we credit our manufacturing overhead for 120,000. We had to transfer the 160 out of cooking into molding. So that journal entry would have been work in process, debit molding for 160, work in process, credit cooking for 160. Where did that come from? The 160 here, the 160 here. The last one we're going to look at is the credit out of the work in process molding, and we know that would end up going into finished goods. So we debit our finished goods 240. We credit our work in process molding for 240. Does that make sense, guys? Any questions? Okay. Next, we're going to compute the equivalent units of production using the weighted average method. So the work in process starting in June, on June 1st, had 300 units, showing 40% of materials were completed, 20% of conversion was completed. Then we show our units started into production, and then our units completed and transferred out during June. Then we show our work in process as of the end of the month, 900 units with regards to 60% completed for materials and 30% completed for conversion costs. So to figure equivalent units, we begin by calculating the equivalent units completed and transferred out of the assembly department in June. Now, you see here, that was 5,400 units. So we start Materials were completed in total. Conversion completed in total. Work in process as of June 30th, they told us there were 900 units at 60% completed for materials and 30% completed for conversion. So now we have equivalent units of production in the department during June. Then equivalent units of production will always equal units completed and transferred, plus equivalent units remaining in work in process. This is the equivalent units of production. So if we had 5,100 units started and completed, and we have our ending work in process of the 900 units, 60% complete, those show the units we started in the month. The beginning work in process, the 300 units at 40% complete, and the 5,100 units that were started, you see here, let me move this up, will show the units completed, 5,400 units completed, that's the 5,100 plus the 900 at 60%. The 540, excuse me, the units completed are the 5,100 plus the 300 units, sorry. The equivalent units are the ending work in process here, the 900 units at 60%, the equivalent, shows us then the equivalent units of production for the month.
Hello, Nancy. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here shows beginning work in process. 300 unit is 40% complete. Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. So why we just add 300 units total to the beginning, but not 300 times 40%?
Because that's what it did start with. You're right. But what we're talking about is for the whole month, these 300 units ended up being completed. So what we're asking here is at the end of the month, how many units were completed? We started the month with 300 units only being 40% completed. But by the end of the month, 5,100 units were started and completed, but we know these 300 units that were sitting in the beginning inventory did get completed. See, the question here is, or the comment here is, how many units were completed in the month? Well, all these got completed, and the 5,100 also got completed. Even though we started with 40% complete, they ended up getting completed in the month. What we care more about, so even though, do you understand what I'm saying? This was at the beginning of the period, we know they ended up getting completed. To come up with equivalent units, we need, this is more important for us, so we can estimate the equivalent units of production, what was sitting in ending inventory.
So we are assuming that this 300 units are completed in this month.
Absolutely. Correct.
Okay.
Because again, process costing, they're all put into a big vat. And so if we started 5,100 during the month and completed them, you know, we got these out too, since they've been sitting since the beginning.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
You bet. So this gives us the 5,100 plus the 900 units show us what's been started. And the 5,100 units plus the 300 units plus our equivalent units of production show us our equivalent units for the month. Now, and this was in regards to materials. Now, in regards to conversion costs, we started again with 300 units plus the 5,100 gives us our 5,400 units completed. We have to come up with the equivalent units in our ending work in process. 900 units times 30%, 270 units, gives us our equivalent units in production. We started 6,000. We didn't complete 6,000, but we started 6,000. So let's look at this exercise. Boy, I wish I could reduce this. How do I get this? Okay, so Highlands Company uses the weighted average method in its process costing. It processes wood pulp for various manufacturers of paper products. Data relating to tons of pulp processed during June are provided below. So we show the tons of pulp work in process June 1st is 20,000 tons, percent completed. As of June 1st, we had materials at 90%, labor and overhead or conversion costs, we call them, at 80%. We show work in process as of June 30th, the end of the month, 30,000 tons of pulp are in work in process at the end of the month, with 60% completed of materials, 40% completed of conversion costs. And then those units that were started into production in June are 190,000 tons. We're going to do two things: compute the number of tons of pulp completed and transferred out during June. Then we'll come up with the equivalent units of production for materials and for labor overhead for June. So what we're going to look at here is work in process. As of June 1st, we had 20,000 tons, right? Let me just make sure. 20,000 tons. We started into production 190,000 tons. So the total tons in process in June are 210,000 tons. We had 30,000 tons still in process at the end of June. So what we completed and transferred out during the month was 180,000 tons of pulp. Okay. The next one we're going to look at is equivalent units of production. Excuse me. We've got equivalent units of production of units transferred out. We know we have 180,000 units we transferred out from our previous portion during the month. The equivalent units in ending work in process inventory. For materials, we see it was 30,000 at 60%. Okay. So our 30,000 at 60% complete is 18,000. So our equivalent units of production for materials is 198,000 equivalent units. For labor at the end of the month, we had 30,000 tons at 40% complete, which is 12,000 equivalent units. So our 180 plus our 12,000 gives us equivalent units of production under conversion costs of 192,000. Okay. Next, let's compute the cost per equivalent unit using the weighted average method. So if we begin work in process with 300 units, showing materials are 40% complete and conversion is 20% complete, and then we started 6,000 units, but we completed 5,400 units during the month of June. We added costs, material cost of 118,621. We added conversion costs of 81,130. And we know our ending work in process is 900 units with 60% complete materials, 30% complete conversion. Okay. We're going to figure out the costing. You see, we started with 300. We started 6,000. We transferred out 5,400, which gives us 900 units left. The formula for computing the cost per equivalent unit is taking the cost of beginning work in process inventory plus our costs added during the period, dividing that by our equivalent units of production. So we have our work in process at the beginning of the month. We've got our materials and our conversion costs totaling 10,039. We added during the month materials of 118,621 and conversion of 81,130. I believe it showed us that right here. We're adding them to give us our total costs. We've got our equivalent units in materials and our equivalent units in conversion. So we see our cost per equivalent unit for materials is $21 per equivalent unit, and for conversion is $15 per unit. So the combination of the materials plus the conversion cost would give us $36 cost per equivalent unit. So as we go down here, Superior Micro Products uses a weighted average method in its process costing system. So we've got the materials, the labor, and the overhead. We have the costs added for the month, materials, labor, and overhead. And they've also given us our equivalent units of production for materials, labor, and overhead. So our job is to compute the cost per equivalent unit for materials, labor, overhead, and in total. Okay, so we start materials are 18,000 plus the costs added give us a total cost of 256,900. If we divide that by our equivalent units, we're at $7.34. We do the same thing with our labor and with our overhead. Labor's $260 equivalent unit, overhead's $13. So our total cost per equivalent unit in this exercise is $22.94. Objective 4, assign costs to units using the weighted average method. So our ending work in process, we have equivalent units between materials and conversion. We have our cost per equivalent units. And then we do our cost. We basically take our equivalent units times the cost to give us the price of the materials and the conversion at the ending work in process. The units transferred out at the same cost per equivalent would give us the WIP at the end of the period of $15,390 in costs, and the amount transferred out at the end of the period, 190, or during the period, I should say, 194,400. Again, just to have a problem so we can understand it. Data concerning a recent period's activity in the prep department, the first processing department in a company, appear below. We have equivalent units in ending work in process inventory of 2,000 for materials, 800 for conversion. And we've got our cost per equivalent unit, $13.86 materials, $4.43 for conversion. A total of 20,100 units were completed and transferred to the next processing department during the period. Compute the cost of ending work in process inventory for materials, conversion, and in total. So the first thing we're going to do, compute the cost of ending work in process for materials, conversion, and in total. So we're basically going to take the 2,000 units of materials at our cost per equivalent unit, to give us the 27,720 cost. Conversion, same thing, 800 units equivalent times the cost per equivalent unit gives us our 3544. So our cost and ending work in process is 31,264. Now, if we transferred to the next department 20,100, again, we're going to take those same unit costs to show cost of the units transferred out. You add the total 20,100 equivalent units times 1386 for 278, 586. Conversion, again, 20,100 times the $4.43 gives us our 89,043. Combine the materials, combine the conversion of the amounts transferred out for a total of 367,629. Okay. Lastly, prepare a cost reconciliation report. We're going to show the costs at the beginning WIP, work in process inventory, along with the costs that were added into production are the total costs that need to be accounted for. And then we'll break them down between what's still an ending WIP, work in process at the end of the month, and what was transferred out to show the breakdown. Operation costing is called a hybrid between job order type of costing and process costing, because it kind of has a little bit of both approaches. It's used when batches of many different products pass through the same processing department. So, reconciliation report. Maria AM Corp uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. The baking department is one of the processing departments in its strudel manufacturing facility. In June, in the baking department, the cost of beginning work in process was $3,570. The cost of ending work in process inventory was $2,860, and the cost added to production was $43,120. We have to prepare a cost reconciliation report for the baking department for June. Okay. So we show the beginning WIP of 3570, which is here, 3570. The cost added to production, 43,120, gives us our total cost to be accounted for, 46,690. Now we need to account for all of it. We'll have the cost of ending work in process and the cost of units that were transferred out to give us the 46,690. It shows us the cost of work in process at the ending period, okay, of 2860. So it gave us that. So we know this is a plug-in. This is the amount that was transferred out. Okay. So the cost of units completed and transferred out can be deduced as follows. The cost added to production. So we started with 3570 plus what we added to production minus or will equal what we ended with plus the units transferred out. So basically the 3570 plus what we added minus what was left in work in process at the end of the period is basically what we know had to be transferred out. Any questions so far? I'm kind of just ranting on. Are you getting it? Scribner's Corporation produces fine papers in 3 production departments: pulping, drying, and finishing. In the pulping department, raw materials such as wood fiber and rag cotton are mechanically and chemically treated to separate their fibers. The result is a thick slurry of fibers. In the drying department, the wet fibers transferred from the pulping department are laid down on porous webs, pressed to remove excess liquid, and dried in ovens. In the finishing department, the dried paper is coated, cut, and spooled onto reels. The company uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. Data for March for the drying department is as follows. So it gives us our equivalent units at the beginning of the period and at the end of the period. And we see the percentages completed in regards to pulping and conversion. And then it shows us pulping cost in work in process at the first of the month. It shows us conversion cost in work in process at the first of the month. It shows us our units transferred to the next department, 157,000 units. It lets us know the pulping cost added during March and the conversion costs added during March. So it tells us no materials are added in the drying department. Pulping costs represent the cost of the wet fibers transferred in from the pulping department. Wet fibers processed in the drying department in batches. Each unit in the above table is a batch, and one batch of wet fibers produces a set amount of dried paper that's passed on to the finishing department. We have to compute the drying department's equivalent units of production for pulping and conversion in March. We'll compute the drying department's cost per equivalent unit for pulping and conversion in March. Then we'll compute the drying department's cost of ending work in process for pulping conversion and total in March. We'll compute the drying department's cost of units transferred out to the finishing department for pulping conversion and total. And then we'll prepare a reconciliation report for the drying department. We're doing it all here. Now, for pulping, equivalent units of production, we know we transferred 157,000 units to the next department. Let me just see where we saw that. We transferred 157,000 units to the next department, right here. Then we have pulping 8,000 units at 100% complete. Conversion 8,000 units at 25% complete. Where did we get that information? At the end of the period, here are 8,000 units, 100% complete. 8,000 units, 25% complete for conversion. So our equivalent units of production, 165,000 for pulping, for conversion, 159,000 units. Now, you see those equivalent units of production came from the previous slide, 165 here, 159 here. The big cost of the beginning work in process, 4,800 for pulping, 500 for conversion. Where did we get that? Right here, 4,800, 500. Here are the costs that were added during the period. Okay, costs added during the period gives us our total cost. Divide that by our equivalent units of production gives us our cost per equivalent unit. Okay. Now, our cost of ending work in process and units transferred out, we have our equivalent units of pulping, of conversion at our cost for pulping, our cost for conversion, gives us our ending costs of ending work in process. The amounts transferred out, 157,000 units. We can see 65 cents per pulping per equivalent unit, 20 cents for conversion. Gives us the cost of 133,450 transferred out. So we can see here, beginning work in process plus the costs added are the total costs to be accounted for, the 139,050. They're broken up between the beginning work in, the ending work in process inventory plus those units that were completed and transferred out. Gives us our 139,050. So I'm going to show you what we've got for homework.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So in the review, we covered like some of the appendixes, like the FICO and that kind of stuff. Are we going to be having that on the homework?
Let me make sure. Well, I can't go in here. You are, you should not have seen that. I did not intend for the review to have that Appendix A on it. I can't get into it right now. So
I think the review actually had all of them on it, like the service department cost allocations too.
Yeah, I did because I had some questions on that too.
okay, so well, let's see what's on the homework, okay? I'm getting ready to show you. So I did not expect the review to have those appendixes, but I'll show you what's on the homework. Okay. So for the homework, here, Old Country Links produces sausages in 3 production departments: mixing, casing, curing, or casing and curing and packaging. In the mixing department, meats are prepared and ground and then mixed with spices. The spiced meat mixture is then transferred to the casing and curing department, where the mixture is force-fed into casings and then hung and cured in climate-controlled smoking chambers. In the packaging department, the cured sausages are sorted, packed, and labeled. The company uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. Data for September for the casing and curing department is as follows. So we see the beginning of the period, the percentage completed, mixing 100%, materials 90, conversion 80, and then we see it at the end of the period. Then we also see the work in process of mixing 1670. The materials, we have the cost here of 90 and conversion 605. Excuse me. And then we've got, so the work in process inventory for mixing, the materials, the conversion, and then the costs that were added during the month. Mixing cost represents the cost of the spice meat mixture transferred in from the mixing department. The spiced meat mixtures processed in the casing and curing department in batches. Each unit in the above table is a batch, and one batch of spiced meat mixture produces a set amount of sausages that are passed on to the packaging department. During September, 50 batches or equivalent units were completed and transferred to the packaging department. So the first thing we're going to do is determine the casing and curing department's equivalent units of production for mixing, materials, and conversion for the month of September. Let's just look at one thing first, okay? So determine the casing and curing department's equivalent units of production for mixing, materials, and conversion. Here's how we're going to figure it out. We started with, let me just, 50 units, they said, was transferred out, I believe. Let me look and see here. 50 batches. During September, 50 batches were completed and transferred to the packaging department. Okay? So we know the units transferred to the next department, 50 units. But in the ending work in process, it shows us in the ending work in process, we had 1 unit. For mixing, it was completed at 100%. For materials, it was completed at 80%. And for conversion, it was completed at 70%. So we're going to use the ending work in process based on the percent completed to see the equivalent units of production. Here under mixing, it's 51. Under materials, 50.8. And for conversion, 50.7. I'm going to let this sit up for a minute so you guys can get that in. Okay? How you guys doing? Is that good? ZB, you can't hear me. Can anyone else hear me? Am I sounding bad to anyone else? Should I get out and get back in? Okay, I guess if someone else tells me, let me know. So requirement 2, compute the casing and curing department's cost per equivalent unit for mixing materials and conversion for the month of September. Round your intermediate calculations to 1 decimal place. Okay, so let's go down here. Cost of beginning work in process. We have this information, 1670 plus 90 plus 605. It's up here. We also have the costs that were added during September here. Okay. So we total them. We get the equivalent units of production from our first requirement. Okay, the 51, the 50.8, and the 50.7. So from that, we can determine or calculate the cost per equivalent unit. The total cost divided by our equivalent unit per mixing, per materials, and per conversion. Can someone tell me when I've given enough time? Because I don't want to go too fast. That makes sense, guys? Are you going to let me know when you're ready? Okay, maybe there's some comments up here. So I'm going to finish this one and then I will end my recording, guys. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. Can I move on? Ready, good. Thank you guys for telling me. Is this making sense? Compute the casing and curing department's cost of ending work in process inventory for mixing materials conversion and in total for September. So how are we going to figure this out? I believe this was up here. Cost of ending work in process requirement 3. So 1 unit cost per equivalent, because we had 1 unit left in ending inventory, cost per equivalent 1630. Materials, we had 0.8 units left. Cost per equivalent unit gives us $96. Conversion costs, we had 0.7 units left in ending inventory at a cost of $850. Gives our cost of ending inventory of $595. So our total cost in ending inventory is the combination of the mixing, the materials, the conversion, and the total is going to be $2,321. Again, remember, here's how we computed our equivalent units of ending inventory. 1 unit was in ending inventory here, with mixing at 100% complete, materials at 80% complete, and conversion at 70% complete, which is how we're getting those figures. Okay, next, compute the casing and curing department's cost of units transferred out to the packaging department for mixing materials conversion and in total. So the amount transferred out, we know that we're 50 units transferred out. We know the cost per unit, $16.30 for mixing, materials $120, conversion $850. That's how you're going to calculate the total cost transferred out. Okay, last. prepare a cost reconciliation report. So we basically show the costs in beginning inventory, the cost added to production, showing the total cost to be accounted for. Now we know our costs in ending inventory because that was shown here, our 23-21, which we show in ending inventory. Total cost to be accounted for, the 132,321. And the cost of units completed and transferred out, that we had 50 units and we had the cost amount to be able to figure out the equivalent units times the total cost. $81,500, 50 units times 1630, materials 50 units times 120, and the 50 units times 42.5 gives you the reconciliation. So guys, I hope this is helpful. I'm going to end the recording now.